Hello, and welcome to the show where I try to make a little sense out of this stunning and brave new world we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses and inviting them to share their truth. It's important in life to be in touch with your feelings, but it's also crucial to be able to back those feelings up with facts. And so the purpose of this show is to attempt to push past purely personal or political driven positions, distinguish fact from fiction and fake news headlines, and hopefully contribute to wider debates about sometimes sensitive subjects by having a good old-fashioned, open and honest adult chat. And today I'm talking Sense Not Sensibility with writer and researcher William Collins, whose blog The Illustrated Empathy Gap has been described as the go-to website for evidence-based research on 21st century hostility towards boys and men. He has also just published a book that I'm very much looking forward to reading. The Empathy Gap, Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect has been described as, amongst other things, the most significant, comprehensive and serious book on gender equality, quite possibly bar none. It's available to buy from Amazon, and obviously I'll include links, and I'll also leave links to sample readings from it, as well as William's brilliant blog, which I sincerely recommend you check out if you haven't already. Regular viewers of The Glass Blind Spot may recall William's insightful talk on the history of universal suffrage, which featured in episode 6 of the Problems with Men series. And one of the reasons I was keen to talk to William is because the next run of that series, which begins this week, focuses around the theme of perceptions. Perceptions of men in general, but in particular perceptions of the people who put their head above the parapets to champion their human rights, and how they tend to oh so often get ridiculed, rubbished, or entirely misrepresented in mainstream media narratives. I talked to William about that and why so many people have so much of a problem with the concept of men's rights. And as this is a show that aims to prioritise facts over feelings, William kicked things off by explaining a piece of mathematical analysis he recently had published with the catchy title of Group Extinction in Iterated Two-Person Games with Evolved Group-Level Mixed Strategies, or alternatively, the mathematical basis of the catastrophic nature of identity politics.
I don't get into maths. I might do a lot of statistics, but I don't really get into maths on my blog site. WordPress wouldn't carry it anyway.
Okay.
But what that blog piece was relating to, and what it was expressing in words, was a piece of mathematical analysis, actually, which is now published. And the analysis, well, ostensibly, if you look at the academic paper, it was nothing to do with identity politics, because I didn't use that phrase. I disguised it.
Okay, yeah.
It was ostensibly about using evolutionary game theory to, as mathematical sociologists often do, to examine what is still partly a mystery, the ability of Homo sapiens to form extremely large social groups without the benefit of kinship to drive it.
Okay.
And things like reciprocal altruism comes into that. So yeah. I scratch your back if, later yeah. You're going to scratch mine. That's basically how it works. But what all these, and it goes back to people like Axelrod and people like that in the 60s and 70s, who did computer tournaments of various different algorithms of, prisoner's dilemma type things, yes. And discovered that tit for tat was a good strategy, for example. Yes, tit for tat means do to that guy what he last did to you. So if he did the dirty on you last time you had any deals with him, you'd repay the compliment now. But if he was straight, then you're straight back. So it's things like that, fairly obvious, but I mean, you can get quite a long way with game theory and actually modelling this algebraically. But what struck me is that all these strategies that people use depend on recognising the individual as an individual, because you have to. They talk about the 3 R's: reputation, reciprocation, and retribution.
Okay.
And the first one, there's the reputation bit. In order for you to have a reputation, I've got to be able to recognize you, and so is everyone else. This is probably why Homo sapiens are so very good at recognizing individuals by their face. And it's also probably why we label people with unique labels called names.
Yeah.
And, you know, Brian isn't good enough, so there'd be a surname attached, right? Yeah. So we know which Brian, you know.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
So, but it struck me identity politics plays down the individual in favor of group identity.
Yeah.
So if you're a black or a Muslim or lesbian, whatever, then that defines you. So I thought, well, what happens if you take this to an extreme then and say the only thing you can recognize in another person is their tribal membership, but you can't tell an individual apart, just you can tell lesbian.
Yeah.
Which lesbian? So I thought, well, what happens if you put that into evolutionary game theory, that constraint? What happens? And then allow two things. Firstly, in evolutionary game theory, you allow evolution to take place whereby the aggregate outcome of the game drives the proportion of that tribe in the population. So if they do well, they increase in proportion in the population. So that's the first thing you do. The second thing you can do is when one person plays another, they can actually play in a way which is cooperative or in a way which is aggressive and reneging on cooperation.
Yeah.
So you can call that a trust issue. If you trust them, then you cooperate. If you mistrust, you don't. So what you can next do is say, well, these tribes are going to try and do as well as they can and increase their population. So they're going to tune their trust and mistrust of others to try and optimize their position in the population. So I thought, well, how does the equilibrium shift if you allow the degree of trust and mistrust, not just between tribes, but within tribes as well, to evolve? And the answer is that one tribe or another is always driven out of existence. Yeah. And you end up with a monoculture.
Yeah.
Always, whatever the parameter settings. And so the conclusion is, if you don't respect individuals, and if you only respect tribal membership, then you will drive intolerance. That was the conclusion.
Yeah. And that kind of, it was fascinating to see it set out in that format and, kind of with that sort of mathematical language. And it is, I think, something that a lot of people kind of feel instinctually.
Yeah.
Because we are seeing it, increasingly, like obviously, Brexit is the current kind of major kind of fault line in society, so it's just, that's another badge. You're a Remainer or you're a Brexiter. But certainly kind of, I suppose kind of, it's been interesting to kind of watch the shift from the notion of equality of opportunity and kind of, legislation that was kind of brought in to address, genuine issues around discrimination or, kind of structural disadvantage. There is evidence of, kind of women couldn't get bank accounts without their husband's signature at one point. I believe you may have a fact about
I've heard that said. I can't vouch for it. It might well be true. But then probably men couldn't get a bank account without, the vicar or the doctor signing it or something as well at the time.
Certainly that. I mean, that's one of the reasons I thought you're talking about the Representation of the People Act was so important, because it sort of, it highlights so well, so kind of so clearly that thing that is so prevalent in society is the up down imbalance of inequality, which has nothing to do with really identity politics. You can be male or female, but you can still be poor. You can be black or white. You can still not be able to vote. Kind of until relatively recently in historical terms. So the equality of opportunity has kind of has shifted quite dramatically to this sort of much more focus of equality of outcome.
Yeah,
which,
they're now very explicit about it. They don't even hide it anymore.
Yeah, and that clearly where it then becomes, it creates intolerance if you're seen as the out group, or if suddenly sort of identity becomes about measurements of privilege and how that currency then sort of interacts with the real world. With that thought in mind, clearly the kind of the popular belief is that men, and particularly white men, and particularly straight white men, and particularly cis white men, and particularly middle-aged white men, etc., are at the top of that kind of privilege tree. And that's, to me, is one of the biggest kind of psychological barriers for people whenever you talk about the concept of men's rights or the concept of male inequalities. So in terms of kind of your experience of people's perceptions of that concept, do you find that when you engage with people with straight down the middle kind of honest statistics and research, etc., do most people kind of actually concur with your view that there clearly are male inequalities that need to be addressed? Or is it something that sort of there's more of a psychological barrier that's sort of driving people's reluctance to even acknowledge, or fear of even platforming, as you pointed out, in universities?
I think there is an emotional, psychological barrier to the acceptance of it. And yes, they can always point out that, the people on top, the alpha males, are cisgendered white men still. Yes. And well, they always have been, but that didn't stop 95% of the population of both sexes being genuinely oppressed throughout almost the whole of history.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And it's because men in power don't favor other men. Men in power favor themselves, their cronies, and women.
Yeah.
It's very simple. Men don't have in-group preference. Men have competition and hierarchy. So the fact that the people on the top are white men, generally, less so now than used to be, but still statistically, doesn't say anything about the vast bulk of men. But people, the Jess Phillipses of this world won't accept that. She'll keep coming back with, you've got to take a step back. Brian, you've got to take a step back.
Yes.
It's you, but the homeless man in the street has got to take a step back.
Absolutely. Obviously, if anyone is familiar with my channel, they'll have noticed that I've done quite a few videos about Jess Phillips by this stage. And one of the reasons is she is the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to this concept,
But she's perfectly in tune with the feminist mindset. I mean, she's not unusual. She's just more outspoken, but I mean, they pretty well all think what she enunciates.
Yes. Oh no, absolutely. But she does it in
the rot is deeper than that, though. Well, I shouldn't say the rot. The difficulty is deeper than that, because it isn't just people who call themselves feminists that are the problem. The lack of understanding is much more widespread amongst both sexes. I mean, the incredulity if you talk about the gender empathy gap. Oh no, I mean men. And you can talk statistics at people, but it doesn't take. They may be stunned into silence for a second or two, but 5 minutes later they've forgotten. It's like brushing water uphill; it's going to come back down again.
Yes,
it is an object lesson in how people are controlled by preconceptions, and preconceptions are situated in the emotional psyche largely, not in the rational psyche.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this in my own head. I mean, part of the reason why I do such detailed numerical research is because my logic module is at permanent war with my gynocentric module.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the time. All the time. And so I know what the power of the gynocentric predilection is. And it's very, very powerful. And that's what we're really up against.
No, absolutely. And the approach that I kind of wanted to take with this series, Problems with Men, was to really try and kind of break these things down into kind of sort of fairly short 20-minute chunks where, you know, I try and consider one specific, whether it's toxic masculinity or the concept of patriarchy. And it's kind of, you know, it is like peeling an onion, because I think kind of, you know, to begin with, as you say, there is the kind of, there's the nature nurture issue, because I think we're kind of instinctually primed as human beings to favor women or protect women, kind of, you know, so that, you know, it's ingrained in our survival instinct for, you know, millennia. Mm-hmm. And then there's the nurture element in terms of all of the, you know, kind of philosophy, I was going to say propaganda, but, you know, kind of all of the different sort of sociological theories and, you know, kind of these, you know, the concepts that are kind of pushed into our consciousness, and the, you know, like I'm thinking of patriarchy is a good example of that. And once you kind of get past that, then there's the lack of alternative information. So that's again why, you know, I think your work is so valuable. But once you kind of break through that sort of level, you're into the area where there's a fear of actually engaging on this subject. That I think kind of, you know, because there are penalties, both in terms of kind of a fear of kind of how people will perceive you. Mm. So, you know, there's that level. But then also there's a, you know, I think there's clear, genuine implications, particularly for those who are successful, at, you know, kind of enunciating a coherent message, that they come after you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of something I particularly wanted to talk to you about, you know, whether you've had any particular experiences of, you know, kind of smear tactics or attacks in terms of your kind of motivation, both personally, but also, I mean, I'm conscious that you were going to do a talk with Mike Buchanan, I think it was, from J4MB, quite recently at a university, and that had to be cancelled due to pressure.
No, I mean, my profile is pretty low. I mean, I don't really use social media. The only stuff I put up on YouTube myself, my own material, is my series Centuries of Oppression, which is basically on the path to universal suffrage, which is, I mean, it is anti-feminist to a degree, but it's mostly historical, really.
Yeah,
certainly anti-suffragette. That's fair enough, but it's not received all that much in the way of views, so it's not really come to that much attention. I don't know how many people that may be of the opposite school of thought look at my blog, but I've not come in for anything really in the way of attack. I mean, I expect it, but it's not happened. I don't get very much in the way of feminist comments on my blog. Very few, you know, very few. I quite like it when I get one, because you know, I like different views. But no, I've that's what you cite, the Winchester talk with Mike. Yeah. It's the nearest I've come to some pushback. And of course, I don't know whether it's really me. You know, if it had been just me and not Mike, I mean, Mike's got a very high profile.
Yeah.
If it had just been me, I don't know what would have happened, really. Maybe I might have got away with it. I don't know, because I'm not that well known. So, no, I don't really have any any stories of smear tactics being used against me yet.
Touch wood. Well, okay. Well, I'll maybe kind of suggest one to you actually, because I think I think this is a good example of the kind of chill factor effect that is. I kind of would view it as being pushed on to the conversation of anyone who is, has a conversation about male inequalities. Mm-hmm. And I was amazed to find, even after, kind of been, fairly aware of how much criticism men's rights, the subject of men's rights gets, and, people that sort of talk about it. I was amazed to find Hope Not Hate kind of including the manosphere in their report of hate in the States 2018. And, kind of one of the interesting things about actually kind of reading their reports is it's actually quite accurate what they're saying, in the sense, just purely in the sense, and now this actually happens quite often when you actually kind of read stuff about, kind of men's rights activists. They essentially describe the fact that there was an ICMI, there was a conference last summer, and then there was a conference for International Men's Day, and they talk about, one of the things I noticed is they talked about the Oxford Men's Group, who would have been one of the groups that you gave a talk to, and these are all kind of factually accurate, but it's just conflated with this kind of, well, first of all, they attach men's rights activists to, they conflate them with all sorts of people on this kind of sort of vague, yes, well, alt-right, and this kind of vague notion of the manosphere, particularly kind of the likes of, what do they call them, pickup artists, that's that seems to be, so it's kind of, it's that sort of 6 degrees of separation. I
couldn't be further removed from a pickup artist. Yes. It's impossible to imagine.
Exactly, likewise. So I wanted to ask you how you felt. I don't know if you've even read that report.
I have, yes. Well, I skimmed it. I noticed, like you, that they picked up on those factual issues, that they've been around, and they've been, the messages for men as well as ICMI, and they even mentioned Network for Men, which I was surprised they got that one, but they got that one as well. I can't think of a kind of more seemingly, kind of innocent, kind of what's wrong with men kind of network. Oh well, you put your finger on it.
Well, exactly.
Men, more than 3 men gathered together in a group, that has to be stopped.
Yeah. No, I'm going to read you a quote from the report, because I find this quite funny, actually, in a strange way. Don't get me wrong, I really am quite disgusted. I mean, obviously, Hope Not Hate have all sorts of kind of baggage, and they clearly have an agenda, and I would not view any of their research as credible, but the point is that sort of these things get quoted, the likes of the Guardian or the government or Newsnight or whatever will kind of frequently refer to them.
They're trying to do a Southern Poverty Law Centre thing.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, and that's worked out brilliantly for the Southern Poverty Law Centre.
Declared arbiters of who is nasty and must be sidelined and vilified, and who are nice people.
Yeah.
So why don't we do that, Brian? Why don't we do that?
Yeah, naughty or nice list. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll define who's nasty and who's nice.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. It's sort of, like to a fair extent, to bring it back to your thing about game theory, kind of to a certain extent, it's a human right to be able to, kind of define who is nasty or nice, or perceive who's nasty or nice. But the difference is that we're not allowed to. Only one side is, and it's kind of,
Have you ever thought how that came about? Why is it they can do this? Why is it they can shut people down by saying, you're a racist, you're a misogynist, You're an Islamophobe. How is it they can do that and we can't?
I certainly have thought about this a lot, and I think there are complicated layers to that. Some of which we've already talked about. That if you kind of touch on emotional subjects, so the example of the statistic of is it 2 women every fortnight are killed in the UK? I think that's a statistic
they say 2 women a week, but it's by their partners. But it's actually more like 2 people a week.
Yeah.
By their partners.
Yeah.
To be slightly more precise.
Yes, and the whole point about that sort of is no matter how kind of exact that data is, it's very much kind of focusing at the peak of a pyramid, which kind of then kind of broadens out to all sorts of implications. And clearly not everybody who experiences domestic violence experiences that to that extent. So as I suppose that's the point. So they kind of go for the emotion. No one likes to be called a racist or an Islamophobe or whatever the case is. I suppose it starts from a place of there will be genuine social issues attached to that ism, but then it becomes part of a corporate machine in terms of who has control of that message. And it becomes quite a kind of money spinner. And I think the example of feminism, I think a lot of it has to do with actual complacency, in the sense that there's one show in town in terms of acceptable research in the area of gender equality. It's there's a monopoly. You can't break into it.
No, not anymore. They've closed the shop.
I mean, this is one of the reasons I'm genuinely positive. I tend to be kind of more positive about the world than a lot of people, and I think Jess Phillips is a good example of that. I think the example of her first real kind of moments with Philip Davis, whenever she was perceived to be laughing at male suicide, and I think to be intellectually fair, I think it's fair to say that she wasn't directly laughing at male suicide, but I think it's entirely fair to say that a large amount of people perceived that as exactly what she was doing, and I think it's entirely reasonable for them to perceive it that way.
She was laughing at the notion that men have disadvantages that deserve talking about.
Yes.
She was absolutely laughing at that notion.
Absolutely. And the statement that I thought was most telling was that men could have their debates, men could talk about inequalities whenever women had equality of outcome in terms of numbers in the Houses of Parliament.
And you know what? I don't believe that.
I wouldn't believe it.
When, not if, when women are equally represented in everything apart from those things which they already dominate.
Yes. Or don't want to dominate.
Men's issues will be even more suppressed.
Yeah.
Even more suppressed, because they will have to be.
Yeah.
That's where we're heading, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's ultimately kind of, some of these things begin to look so ridiculous. Maybe I'm optimistic, but kind of people increasingly see the disconnect between the behavior of people like Phillips and what they're supposed to be representing. So I don't know what I mean. Do you have a genuinely bleak view of kind of where we're going?
Oh well, I should warn you. I'm a terrible, miserable old fart. So you should never ask me for a prediction, because it will always be Cassandra-like,
Sure.
But bearing that in mind, no, my view is not very optimistic, to put it mildly. But if we have any hope here, we've got to look to how we can politically counter the feminist progressive axis. And that there's three natural constituencies that you could appeal to. One, of course, is just men, but that's never going to fly, because there will never be a large group, gender-based male group, lobbying for men's issues. It's just not going to happen. It's men don't have in-group preference, and men don't work that way, and it will always seem like men attacking women. So it's not going to happen. The other constituency that potentially you could appeal to is the traditional conservative axis, because the traditional conservative axis is now anti-feminist.
Yeah.
It wasn't always, but it is now, because they have finally realised that feminism is what's undermined their position.
Yeah.
So there is that. But unfortunately, I can't see the traditional conservative school of thought ever regaining its lost ground. I mean, the Conservative Party doesn't represent it. There's very few genuine conservatives, even in the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
So I can't see that ever being a mechanism for political power that's going to redress this balance. So that leaves us with one, and it's the one that people aren't appealing to, and they're not appealing to it because the men's right thing has got mislabeled as right wing.
Yes.
So the one that's missing, and the one that could make all the difference, is the working class.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's the working class that are being trashed.
Yeah.
It's working class men, of course, but it's also working class women. Why? Because men and women are in the same boat. So if you trash men, you will trash the corresponding women. That's how it works. Feminism, and this is really ironic, because people talk about cultural Marxism, and feminists have represented men as the bourgeoisie and the poor oppressed women are the proletariat. But actually, you know, the feminist wing, they're the neo-bourgeoisie. They're driving disadvantage. Just look at their policies. I mean, for a start, it's very obviously driven by middle-class white women who are very well educated and well heeled.
Yeah.
That's obvious. And what's their main thing? Oh, pay gap, equality for women. Where? Oh, as MPs, as High Court judges, in the BBC.
Yeah.
You know, they're driving this equality for themselves.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything. And I think the Labour Party are now beginning to realise, oh dear, we've left our true constituency behind. And never more obvious than in Brexit, of course, because the Labour Party now thinks the working class are a bunch of racist bigots. So the working class are a constituency up for grabs if you're a politician.
Well, there's a thought for any budding politicians out there. A party that respects and represents the working class. Maybe someday, I guess. Anyway, thanks for sticking around, and don't forget to check out William's blog and, of course, his book. Over the next few weeks, I'll be talking Sense Not Sensibility with some very interesting people indeed, including more from William, and in an effort to complement the run of Problems with Men episodes that kick off this week. To begin with, we'll be focusing on the theme of perceptions and how the media attempt to portray people prepared to stick their head above the parapet and speak in favour of universal human rights for all, regardless of colour, creed, or what's between your legs, or ears for that matter. After that, my aim will be to expand the conversation to a whole range of subject matter consistent with the themes explored by this channel. So if you have a particular perspective or truth to tell, or if there's a theme you'd like to see discussed, drop me a line and let me know. In the meantime, don't forget to check out the links below the line. And remember, if you see an elephant...
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.